In a city that never sleeps, the loudest truths are often hidden in the softest neon whispers of the night. We bring those secrets into the light, revealing the raw emotions behind the glowing lights. Subscribe today and listen closely to the stories the city hides.
The day I came back from 8 months in Ecuador, I wasn't expecting a parade. I wasn't expecting balloons or a banner or even a home-cooked meal. I just wanted to sit on my own couch, in my own living room, with the particular quiet that only your own four walls can give you after a long time away. What I was not expecting was a lockbox on the front door. I stood on the sidewalk with my duffel bag still on my shoulder, staring at it. A blue combination lockbox, the kind realtors use, hanging where my key used to go. The flower bed I'd planted along the front walk was overgrown, which made sense. 8 months, no one watering. But the windows had been cleaned. The gutters had been cleared. There was a fresh coat of paint on the trim, a color I had not chosen, a warm beige that was not the pale blue I'd left behind. A man in a polo shirt came around the corner of the house holding a clipboard, and he stopped when he saw me. "Can I help you?" he said, the way someone says it when they're actually asking you to leave. "My name is Ivy. I'm 31 years old. I spent the last 8 months in Guayaquil as a volunteer coordinator for a nonprofit that builds water filtration systems in rural communities. I have a background in civil engineering, which is why they wanted me, and I have a particular talent, one I developed partly through my work and partly through a childhood that required it, for staying very still on the outside while processing very fast on the inside." I looked at the man in the polo shirt. I looked at the lockbox. I looked at the fresh paint. "I own this house," I said. He laughed, a short, uncomfortable sound. "Ma'am, this property is currently under contract. Showing starts in 20 minutes. I'm going to have to ask you to, who listed it?" I asked. He hesitated. "The sellers are," he checked his clipboard, "a Mr. and Mrs. Hargrove." I set my duffel bag down on the sidewalk. "My uncle's name is Douglas Hargrove. He is 62 years old, retired, and has been temporarily living in a house I bought, not his, mine, for the last 4 years, ever since his second divorce. His wife is Pamela, who I have always called Aunt Pam, even though she married into the family when I was in college, and I have never felt particularly close to her. They have been, as my mother used to say before she stopped talking about it, going through some things. Going through some things, it turned out, meant they had listed my house for sale at $389,000 and were scheduled to close in 11 days. I found this out not from the realtor in the polo shirt, who asked me 3 more times to leave the property and then got very quiet when I explained calmly, clearly, that I held the deed. I found it out from the listing itself, which I pulled up on my phone standing right there on my own front walk, among the overgrown lavender and the new beige paint I hadn't chosen. 4 bedrooms, 2.5 baths, original hardwood floors, updated kitchen. The photos were good. Whoever they'd hired had done the staging well. My dining table was still there, but my grandmother's quilt, the one I'd hung on the wall of the second bedroom, the one she hand-stitched herself from pieces of her children's childhood clothing, was gone, replaced by a neutral gray canvas print. I want to tell you I stay calm because I'm disciplined. That's partly true, but mostly I stayed calm because the moment I saw that lockbox, something cold and very focused settled over me. The same thing that happens when I'm on a project site and something goes structurally wrong and everyone around me is starting to panic. Panic doesn't fix the problem. Understanding the problem fixes the problem. So I stood there and I thought through what I actually knew. My uncle had been living in my house rent-free, which I had agreed to because he was family, and because I thought it was temporary. I had given him a limited power of attorney before I left for Ecuador, not because I trusted him with anything significant, but because I needed someone to deal with the property management company if the boiler broke or the pipes froze. It was supposed to cover maintenance decisions, nothing else. The question was whether he had somehow leveraged that document to do something he had absolutely no legal right to do. I called my attorney from the sidewalk. Her name is Cheryl. She is 58 years old and has the energy of someone who has seen every possible version of human bad behavior and finds most of it mildly interesting. She picked up on the second ring, and I told her what I was looking at. "Send me a photo of the lockbox and the listing," she said. "Don't go inside. Don't touch anything. Where are you staying tonight?" "I was planning to stay here," I said. "Right." A pause. "Call me back in 20 minutes. The realtor was still standing by the corner of the house, watching me from a careful distance. I smiled at him. He did not smile back. My uncle and aunt arrived at 4 o'clock. I was sitting on the front steps with my duffel bag when their SUV pulled up. I watched my uncle get out of the passenger side. Pam always drives, a detail I had never thought much about until that moment. And he saw me and stopped. Just stopped. One hand still on the car door. His face did something complicated and then settled into an expression I recognized from my childhood. The look of a man composing a version of events. Pam came around the front of the car. She was wearing sunglasses even though it was overcast, and she had a Starbucks cup in each hand, and when she saw me, she smiled. "Oh," she said. "Ivy, you're early." I let that sit for a second. Early. "My flight landed this morning," I said. "I came straight here." "We thought you weren't back until next week," my uncle said. He'd recovered. His voice was normal now, even a little warm. "I changed my return date 2 months ago," I said. "I emailed you." "I didn't get that." I had the email on my phone with the red receipt. I didn't show it to him then. I just nodded. "Why is there a realtor here?" I asked. He sighed. The sigh of a man who has been waiting to have this conversation and has prepared for it. "We need to talk," he said. "We've had a really rough year, Ivy. A really rough year, Ivy. A really rough year. We got into some debt, okay? Some serious debt. It happened fast and we didn't have a lot of options and you were gone. And we needed to move forward." Pam sat down on the porch railing and looked at her phone. "How much debt?" I asked. He glanced at Pam. 90,000, he said. "Between the medical bills and it's a long story. We needed the equity from the house to clear it and start over. We're going to rent somewhere smaller. You'll get the leftover amount after the mortgage is paid off. There's a buyer lined up, Ivy. A young couple. They're good people. It's a fair price." I looked at him. He believed it, I think, or he talked himself into believing it so thoroughly that the distinction had collapsed. He believed it the way people believe things when the alternative, acknowledging what they've actually done, is too uncomfortable to hold. "What mortgage?" I said. "A beat. I'm sorry? I paid this house off 3 years ago," I said. "There's no mortgage." Something shifted in his face. "Right. I know that. I just mean, and I need you to explain to me what authority you think you had to list this property." He started into a version of events involving the power of attorney and how he'd consulted someone and how they'd said it covered real property decisions and how he'd been trying to protect the asset while I was unreachable. He used the word protect 4 times. He was very calm, which I think surprised him because he'd clearly expected a different reaction. He'd expected tears or rage, the kind of reaction he could manage. He didn't know what to do with quiet. "The power of attorney I gave you," I said, when he finished, "covers maintenance and minor repairs. It specifically excludes real property transactions. I had Cheryl draft it that way on purpose. Page 3, paragraph 2. He blinked. "Beyond that," I said, "you couldn't have sold this house regardless, because I transferred the title out of my personal name 18 months ago. I had done this on Cheryl's advice when I started taking longer international assignments. Put it into a revocable living trust. Simple, standard, nothing dramatic. My uncle's name was nowhere in the trust documents. He had no authority over it whatsoever. I watched him try to rebuild the version of events in real time. The agent said, "The agent didn't run a title search," I said, "which your buyer's realtor certainly will. At which point they'll find that the seller on your contract has no legal standing to sell, and the contract is void." Pam finally looked up from her phone. For the first time, she took off her sunglasses. Her expression wasn't the warm blankness she usually wore. It was sharper. "How do we fix this?" she said. "Not to my uncle. To me. I thought about my grandmother's quilt." "Where is the quilt that was hanging in the second bedroom?" I said. A pause. "We put some things in storage," Pam said carefully. "I need an address." She gave it to me. I wrote it down. "The contract is void," I said. "I'll have Cheryl send a letter to the listing agent tonight. The showing tomorrow is canceled. I'd like you both out of this house within 30 days, which is more notice than you legally have to give a house guest, and more than you gave me." I picked up my duffel bag. "I'm going to get a hotel room tonight. When I come back tomorrow morning, I'd like my key." My uncle started to say something. The Weir family version of the argument, I could see it coming. The appeal to everything that's supposed to override things like deeds and trust documents and the law. "You're right," I said before he got there. "We are family, which is why I'm giving you 30 days instead of having a sheriff's deputy come to the door tomorrow morning." I left them on the porch. Cheryl sent the letter that night. By 9 o'clock the following morning, The listing had been pulled. By noon, I had spoken to the buyer's agent, who was understandably upset but professional, and who confirmed that the title search had in fact been scheduled for the following week, which would have unraveled the whole thing regardless. They'd lost some time. I felt genuinely sorry about that part. They were young, apparently, saving up for years. Not their fault. What I did not know until the following morning, when I arrived at the house to find my uncle sitting alone at my kitchen table, was that $90,000 wasn't the whole story. I came in through the back door. I'd found my spare key in the lockbox since he'd never had the code changed, a mistake in a long line of them. And I found him in the kitchen with a cup of coffee and the look of a man who hadn't slept. Pam's car wasn't in the driveway. "Where's your wife?" I said. "Her sister's," he said. "She left last night." I poured myself a cup of coffee from the pot he'd made and sat down across from him. And for the first time in the whole thing, I felt something that wasn't cold and focused. He looked old. Not the dignified old that some people grow into, but diminished, like something had been quietly taken out of him over a long time. "Tell me the actual number," I said. It was $140,000. The medical debt had been real. A surgery Pam had needed 2 years ago that their insurance had only partially covered. But they'd also refinanced a car they couldn't afford, made a series of investments that hadn't worked out, and borrowed from 2 different people my uncle described vaguely as private lenders, which in context I understood to mean people who were not waiting on a check. "Why didn't you call me?" I said. He wrapped both hands around his coffee cup. "You were in Ecuador. I have a phone. You were." He stopped. "I was embarrassed," he said finally. "I kept thinking I was going to figure it out myself. And then it was 6 months later and I hadn't figured it out and it was worse. And I didn't know how to tell you. And then the agent told me that with the equity in the house, I could clear everything and still have money left over. And I thought, she's been gone 8 months. She's barely here anyway. She can find somewhere else." He paused. "I know how that sounds. It sounds like you decided my home was yours to give away," I said. He didn't answer that. We sat there in my kitchen for a while. Outside the window, my overgrown garden was turning gold in the morning light. The lavender going to seed, the rosemary still holding. I planted that rosemary the first fall I owned the house. I was 26. I'd never owned anything before, and I kept going outside to look at it just to confirm it was still there. "I'm not going to help you with the debt," I said eventually. "I want you to be clear on that. I'm not angry in the way you think I am, and I'm not going to spend the next 10 years holding this over you. But I'm also not going to fix it for you." He nodded. "What I am going to do," I said, "is give you the name of a nonprofit credit counselor I trust. You call her on Monday. You tell her the full number, not the one that makes you look better. And you deal with this the slow way, the honest way, because the fast way almost destroyed something I built by myself over years." I slid a piece of paper across the table with the name and number on it. He looked at it. 30 days, I said. "I mean it." He left in 22. I spent the first week back deep cleaning everything, which is how I process things. I found my grandmother's quilt in the storage unit, folded carefully in a plastic bin, which surprised me enough that I stood in the unit for a minute just holding it. It smelled like the cedar trunk it had spent decades in. It was fine. I rehung it in the second bedroom. The neutral gray canvas print I put by the curb with a "free" sign. Someone took it within the hour, which felt like the universe exercising its most basic form of efficiency. My uncle called me 6 weeks later to tell me he'd met with the credit counselor. He didn't thank me exactly. He said it had been a hard conversation and she hadn't sugarcoated anything. I said that was kind of the point. There was a long pause, and then he said, "I'm sorry, Ivy." Just that. No embellishment, no version of events. I believed him, which I hadn't expected. "I know," I said. "What I know now, that I didn't fully understand when I was standing on that sidewalk with my duffel bag and the lockbox and the realtor who wanted me to leave my own property. What I know is that the preparation wasn't about distrust. I hadn't put the house in a trust because I suspected my uncle. I'd done it because I was going away for a long time, and Cheryl had told me it was smart, and I was 29 years old and trying to be the kind of person who does the smart thing before they need it. The trap wasn't a trap. It was just good planning that happened to hold when it needed to. When I came back from Ecuador, I had $47 in my checking account and a duffel bag with 8 months of field clothes and a journal I'd filled from cover to cover. I had no one to pick me up from the airport. I took a ride share to a house with a lockbox on the door and a stranger in the yard. But I had the deed. I had Cheryl's number. I had a trust I'd set up 2 years before any of this was even a thought in anyone's mind. That's the thing no one tells you about building a life. It's not dramatic. It's not a montage. It's a Tuesday afternoon when you're 29 and you sign some papers at your attorney's office and you feel vaguely adult about it, and then you go home and make pasta and don't think about it for 2 years. And then one day you need it and it's there. I changed the locks that first week back. New deadbolt, new lockbox code. Not that I needed a lockbox, that one was going straight in the trash. I repainted the trim myself over a weekend, back to the pale blue. My neighbor from across the street came over and asked if I needed help, and I said yes, and we spent a Saturday afternoon painting and talking, and she told me she'd wondered what was going on with the house while I was away, that the for sale sign had gone up suddenly and then disappeared just as fast. What happened? She asked. Family, I said, which covered it. She nodded. She's 73 and has been on this street for 40 years, and I suspect she has several lifetimes of stories that also get summarized with a single word. The rosemary in the garden had kept going while I was away. Rosemary in the garden had kept going while I was away. Rosemary is like that. It doesn't need a lot of attention. It just needs to be in the right soil, in the right place, and it will hold. I'm back now. The house is mine. The quilt is on the wall. The locks are new. For the first time since I landed, when I walked through the front door, the quiet was right. There's something I've thought about a lot since all of this happened, and it's not the lockbox or the fresh beige paint or even finding my grandmother's quilt folded in a storage bin. What I keep coming back to is the Tuesday afternoon when I was 29 years old and I sat in Cheryl's office and signed papers for a revocable living trust that I didn't fully understand and didn't think I'd need for a very long time. I remember driving home afterward and feeling vaguely responsible the way you feel after you finally schedule a dentist appointment you'd been putting off. And then I went home and made pasta and didn't think about it again for 2 years. That document didn't save my house because I was clever. It saved my house because I did a quiet, unglamorous thing when I had no particular reason to do it yet. That's what I want people to actually hear when I tell this story. Because I think the part that sounds like a clever trap, the trust, the moment I pulled out the paper, makes it seem more dramatic than it was. It wasn't a trap. It was Tuesday afternoon paperwork. The drama came later, but the protection came from the boring part. My uncle is not a villain. I thought about that too. He's a man who got into real trouble, felt too ashamed to ask for help, and made a decision that he had rationalized so thoroughly by the time I came home that he genuinely seemed surprised I wasn't willing to negotiate. That's not a monster. That's just someone who let embarrassment compound into desperation and let desperation make a choice that wasn't his to make. The cause was shame. The effect was almost losing something I'd spent years building. Those two things are connected in a straight line. And I think if my uncle had been able to look at that line clearly, earlier, before it got to where it got, he might have picked up the phone. He didn't. And because he didn't, he ended up sitting at my kitchen table at 7 a.m, looking like a man who had finally run out of road. I don't feel good about that image, but I also think it was necessary. Not as punishment, as reality. Some things only become solvable when the person in the middle of them can no longer pretend they aren't happening. What I keep thinking about is the version of me who doesn't sign those papers. Who means to get around to it? Who puts it on a list? Who tells herself she'll do it when she gets back from Ecuador? That version of Ivy comes home to a lockbox on her door and has almost no recourse. The house would have been under contract. The title would have appeared valid. By the time anything got untangled legally, the damage would have been done. That version of the story ends with me living in a hotel room and spending 3 years in court. The only difference between that version and this one is a Tuesday afternoon and a boring stack of papers. I think about that a lot when I hear people say they'll get to it eventually. The will, the trust, the legal thing their attorney mentioned once. The preparation that feels unnecessary until the exact moment it becomes the only thing standing between you and losing everything. It doesn't feel like armor when you're putting it on. It just feels like paperwork. But that's what quiet, consistent good judgment looks like before it's ever tested. It looks like nothing. It looks like a Tuesday. I'm not harder now. I don't trust less. I still let people into my home, still believe most people are trying their best most of the time. But I also know that love and legality are two separate systems, and keeping them both in order isn't cynicism. It's just being honest about how the world actually works. The rosemary I planted when I was 26 is still in the garden. It held while I was gone for 8 months. Some things, if you put them in the right soil, just keep going.